Good morning. So I did spend a bit of time this weekend on a few things. The thing I kind of want to talk about most is the bow hunting, though. So I got a nice bow, compound hunting bow set up for myself. And by set up, I of course mean the Lord provided one that was already sized to exactly my dimensions. And I just got some arrows for it, and I'm kind of like getting used to it, getting used to the drop and everything. It was a used bow, so someone else had set it up previously, and the sights are not set up for the arrows that I have and for, I guess, the length. Well, I guess they should have been set up for the length. I don't know what happened. I don't know what's up with the dude that set it up previously. It seems to have been used. I'm just not sure how successfully it was used. He also threw in some arrows of varying quality and mismatched length, which kind of implies that he doesn't know about compound bows and the arrows should be matched and need to be tuned to it, or it's actually kind of dangerous. So I don't know. I find the history of tools quite interesting. I had the Ruger GP100. I bought it used, and I went to shoot it, and it was, I forget what it was. It was low left or high right or something like that. The rear moves the bullets, low, high right. Yeah, I think it was, I shot it, and it was pulling, it was, the point of impact was like high right. I was like, that's weird. And I tried it a few more times, and it was like way high right, and it had adjustable sights on it. So I was like, well, that doesn't make any sense. So I'd shoot right-handed and shoot left-handed just to make sure that I wasn't like snatching the trigger and pulling it. And then I was like, all right, well, I kind of confirmed this, so I'm just gonna adjust the sights. So I adjusted the sights back down, and I shot dead center, and I'm like, all right, that was weird. And I was thinking about it later, and it's actually a common mistake for right-handed people shooting pistols to snatch the trigger, or kind of, it's technically a flinch, but what you're doing is you're pulling the trigger, and you're pulling down into the left if you're right-handed, and down into the right if you're left-handed. So I realized that if I was shooting the pistol and the bullets were landing down into the left, I would adjust my rear sight up and to the right. And by doing so, you know, you adjust the sight, and then your flinch compensates. So no matter how much you adjust, you still shoot low and left because you're not addressing the actual problem. You're thinking it's a hardware problem when it's actually a software problem. So it's very interesting. So I kind of figured that might have been the case with the previous owner who bought it and was like, oh, this thing can't shoot straight. This is a piece of trash. I'll sell it. And I picked it up for, oh man, I don't even want to remember. It was a great price. I'm not even going to try to remember the number. La 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 la. Oh, I missed that gun. The tools, yes. So the tools kind of reveal the history and even the mindset of the person who owned them previously. And you can tell this just by looking at people's actual tools and how well they take care of them or don't take care of them, or there's these things called idiot marks, and they're pretty common on 1911s. I think there's some for other models, but basically, if you're an idiot who doesn't know what you're doing, you will scratch the finish in a couple different ways. And if you pick up a gun and you see those scratches, you say, ah, those are idiot marks. This gun previously was owned by an idiot. And that's just by looking at the mechanical, just by looking at the device. You can tell that, the tool, you can figure that out, which is pretty impressive, pretty cool, actually. You know, the history of the tool is written on its finish, or on its bearing surfaces. So I got the bow figured out. I got some new arrows for it. I shot it and adjusted the sights for it, and I only adjusted I'm very slow with this stuff. I'm very methodical. I don't change two things at the same time. I go slow. I confirm, because I just frankly don't have the time to chase down bugs that I've introduced by changing more than one thing at a time. And that extends, that is an electronic creed, a software creed, and a mechanical creed. I don't have time. I don't have time to introduce errors by changing more than one thing at a time. It's just a waste and frustrating. So I had adjusted the sights and got them to in horizontal line, the windage line, and the vertical line I was just putting a dot on the target and shooting the target at different ranges and figuring out what dot was the most useful. And in my case, it's just the bottom dot. So figuring out what the ranges are for that bow, because much like a firearm, the projectile arcs and your line of sight is straight. So since your line of sight is straight and the projectile arcs, there are coincidences of that arc and the line of sight in 2 points. And that's, in firearm terms, that's called your zero. So you have, like ARs are often zeroed at 60 yards? Because a 60-yard zero on a, how many grains? A 55 grain 223 or 556 is, a 60-yard zero is the same as a 200-yard zero, and shoots nice and flat. So that's kind of the idea. Because it's a carbine anyways, it's short range, it doesn't really matter. So figuring that out for the bow and what the sight is, where that sight needs to be, I kind of got a feel for the distance where that bottom bead, that sight point, the way the bow, compound bow's sighting works is there's 4 different fiber optic lights, more or less oriented like this, so kind of logarithmic, to represent the drop as the drop gets more and more with more distance. So in this case, I was sighting off of one of them at the bottom and just kind of figuring out where the point of impact was at the different ranges. And I got a pretty good idea of where, how close something has to be in order for it to be right on that dot. And then if it gets any further than that, then it's going to be over that dot. And if it gets even further, it'll be up to the next dot above. And then the same thing, a little further, it goes back down to the middle of those 2 dots. And then at, 10, I think it's 30. I forget if it's 20 or 30 yards. I should probably check that. But at whatever the last yardage is, it's back down to that first dot. And then any further than that, you're going to have to hold it above your target and just kind of, eyeball it. So it's non-trivial to figure some of this stuff out, and everything needs to be kind of tuned. And while just about anyone can pick up a firearm and say, hey, line up the sights and squeeze the trigger, and you're done, a bow is sized and fitted and to an extent set to your strength. So if you can't pull back a 70-pound bow, you're just gonna have a bad time. It would need to be dialed down, and then when it's dialed down, it needs to be dialed down in a certain way where it's evenly adjusted. These squirrels are just everywhere, man. Yeah, so I always kind of viewed bows as something that you used for larger game. The utility, at least in the current legal standards, is that using a bow to hunt deer at a public land area next to us, or pretty close to us, extends my deer season from like 2 weeks to 3 months or something. It's much longer for bow season. You're allowed to go a lot more, and you have a lot more opportunity. So that was why I was interested. But at that point, I started, I was doing more research on bows and figuring all this stuff out, and I saw people taking small game with bows. I was like, well, how does that even work? Broadhead is probably about that big around, as far as cutting area. And like, you cut up a squirrel real bad for something like that. And then of course, since you have more arc and there's more, there's just more opportunity to miss. You're also just, it doesn't seem like a good fit. So I found out about these. They're called Judo points, or any other, frankly, blunt point. And the idea is that it hits pure kinetic energy, no cutting action at all, which is interesting from a physics perspective, because you're essentially delivering 70 pounds, and I don't know if this translates to foot pounds, but at 100, I gotta weigh the grain of, figure out how much the arrow weighs, but you deliver all of the weight of this bow into this arrow, and then that arrow strikes a target with a point of with an area of, like that, smaller than that, and it just destroys flesh. It's a pure kinetic weapon, which is really interesting. I mean, it's very strange, but I think about that, and I think about what that kind of energy would do and what the equivalent is. And I feel like you have to figure out the weight, the weight of the arrow, the weight of the squirrel, average weight of a squirrel, and the area, and essentially consider the impact of a human being hit by a bowling ball traveling at 200 feet per second or something like that. It's like you're falling out of a plane. And it's the other thing is, it makes it very controllable. If you're, that's part of it, is if you don't have a clear backstop and you're firing a firearm, especially a 22. 22 will go, if you arc at 45 degrees, 22 will go miles. How much energy it'll have at the end of that is not, it's probably not a lot, but it's also still not great. You're still gonna, still might damage something. It's as statistically unlikely as it is, but it's still possible. But with the arrow, all of that range is just spilled out, and the energy is very close up. So it's an interesting way, in that it's a different way of hunting, and it's a little bit more controlled, I guess. I don't know. It's just been very interesting. That's all I wanted to talk about, I guess. So, bows, huh?